Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Leamington Library. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Tonight, we are here with Lee because we have got an adult reading challenge called Book Bingo, and we are celebrating a category a month with an author. And tonight we are here for a book recommended by a friend, because all our friends recommend Lee Child. So if you haven't signed up to Book Bingo yet, please do. It's absolutely free. You read 12 books over the year from different categories. When you've finished, you get an amazing badge, but also you get put into a prize draw to win £100 National Book tokens. Thank you. And we are really excited to say that we were the winners of the Midlands category for the British Book Awards, which were on Monday evening, and me and my colleague Lucy at the back there went to the awards. We didn't win overall, but we won the Midlands category, so you're really proud of that. So thank you. So you can say you're part of an award-winning reading challenge. I'm going to use that for the rest of my life. Hello, Lee Child, and welcome to Leamington Library.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I always think two things. First of all, readers are the most thoughtful and pleasant people in society. And those readers that use their local library are doubly so. So thank you all very much for being readers. Clearly people of charm and quality, all of you. And what a lovely library this is. I think, am I right in thinking that, how did you get hold of me? You wrote through a publisher and it somehow ended up with my American publisher?
Yes, I Googled you and I got your agent.
Oh, right. Okay.
And I didn't think anything would ever happen. And then I got a reply and I could not believe it.
Yeah, well, I'd lived in America for nearly 30 years, came back to Britain, and I am British. I have a passport, I'm a citizen, I'm entitled to be here, absolutely, but I felt like an asylum seeker. And I felt like you took me in and let me live here. So I wanted to do what I could to pay it forward. And libraries are one of the obvious things. I love libraries. Libraries are the thing that literally created my life. And so if there's anything I can do to help the library, I will. So here we are.
And before we get on to that, do you have a favourite memory from childhood of libraries?
I do. I mean, the first library I'll give you a potted biography first to explain the geography. My dad was a civil servant and just starting out. And what they do with that, they'd move him around a lot to get experience at different offices in different places. They used to anyway back then. So this is probably too much information, but I was conceived in Leicester. I was born in Coventry and then very quickly moved to Birmingham.
Wow.
So I'm a local boy. And so it's good to be back here. And yeah, my library close to where I ended up in Birmingham was Elmwood Library in Handsworth Wood, which was in a burned out house. There was this house there, clearly a bomb site, a house that was partially destroyed, but it had the ground floor and one of the rooms was the library. And, we were not poor. I'm not making out that we were starving or anything. We always had shoes and we always had 3 meals a day. But apart from that, we had nothing. It was typical of the 1950s, early 1960s. Nobody had any money. There was never any spare money. In fact, I remember the saying in Birmingham where everybody got paid in cash on a Friday in a little brown envelope. And whereas elsewhere in the world, people say something is as rare as hen's teeth. In Birmingham, they said, as rare as a pound note on a Thursday. And that's how it was that, we ate, but there was nothing else. We couldn't afford books. So the library was the only thing. It's where we went. So I went to this little library that was near my house in this destroyed building in one ground floor room. And it probably had, 300 books in it. And I quickly used all of them up. And so the only good thing my mother ever did for me, my mother was a monster, but she she took us then to the next library in Perry Bar, which was Tower Hill Library, which I remember I was about 6 or 7 the first time we went there. And as a 7-year-old, I remember you first of all had to cross a canal on a scary high footbridge. And I felt like a jungle explorer on one of those bridges made out of vines or something. And we crossed that, and then you turned left, and at the top of the hill was this glittering glass skyscraper full of books. And that was a 7-year-old's impression. Later on, that library was in trouble. And, Birmingham is bankrupt, basically, and library funding is in peril. And so a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, they got in touch saying, we've got funding problem. We know you came here as a kid. Would you join a campaign? And so I did, and they sent me pictures. And of course, it is not a glittering glass skyscraper. It's a perfectly normal 2-story building, but it has large windows. And so it sort of felt like that to me. But it was just packed with books, and I still cannot get over it. You can walk into a place, and a nice lady will let you take whatever book you want, which was a fantastic proposition for me. And the only issue that I had, we went on a Friday afternoon, regular as clockwork, and Birmingham system back then, you had a library ticket, you could get 2 books with that library ticket. And that was never enough for me. So I adopted, at about the age of 8 or 9, I adopted this Chicago voter fraud system whereby anybody who ever came to our house, I made them sign up for a library ticket. And, in fact, our dog had a library ticket so that I could get 6 books a week. And that's a pace I've kept at all my life, about 6 books a week. I just love it. I love reading. I'm a total nerd, and a total, give me the choice. And I've done fantastic things in my life because of this career. Fantastic things. I've met presidents, kings. Last couple of weeks ago, I had to go back to New York to fix something on my house, which my daughter now lives in, which is a problem because apparently you're not allowed to evict your own family. So she's squatting in my house, which means I can't sell it. So I had to go back there and fix something. And as it happened, the king and queen were doing a thing. They just did a visit to the U.S. and Camilla was doing an event at the New York Public Library. So I went to that. I'm hanging out. I know President Clinton, he's an actual friend of mine. I know Obama. I'd like loads of people. And yet, give me the choice. I want to be left alone with a book. That is really what I want to do.
Wow. Well, you'd love libraries now because you can borrow 10 books at a time. Well, I think I speak for the whole library service when I say thank you for your support for libraries. But obviously, the thing you are most famous for is Jack Reacher. So shall we have a little chat about him?
He's the only thing I'm famous for.
So let's kick it off with what first inspired you to create Jack Reacher, and did you expect him to become such an enduring character?
What happened for me was I went to primary school in Handsworth Wood in Birmingham, and it was one of those very, very old-fashioned schools, rigorous. It was just a regular county school. It was just the neighborhood school. But the headmistress was this battle axe called Maisie Lister. And she was all about reading, writing, and arithmetic. And that's what you learned. And you learned it to an unbelievably high standard. By today's measures, I left that school at 10. I had to go to secondary school. And at the age of 10, I had learned enough to get through life. I didn't really need to learn another thing. I'd have been fine. It was that type of an old-fashioned school. The only weird thing about Maisie Lister was that she was manic about American musical theater. For some reason, she just loved it. And in fact, there was show business running in that family, apparently, because her niece was an actress called Carolyn Lister, who was one of the founding members of the cast of Crossroads. Remember that? And so there was some kind of showbiz thing in that family. And Maisie she just loved it, musical theater. So twice a year, Christmas time and in the summer, she would put on a show, which was a basically a random selection of her favorite songs, stitched together with an entirely meaningless plot. And I first went as an audience member, as a pupil, and I saw these kids on the stage, all beaming with joy and lit up, and the parents in the audience beaming with joy. And I just fell in love with the proposition of entertainment, that I maybe could do something that other people would enjoy. And that was all I ever wanted to do in my life. And I started out in the theater, really, which was a high school in the theater group. And I loved it so much that I would then try and find extra things to do. And back then, there was no such thing as an intern, no such thing as work experience. That hadn't been invented yet. But that was basically what I tried to be. I literally knocked on the stage door of the Birmingham Rep and said, "Is there anything I can do?" I think I was 15 at that time. And sure, they found me little odd jobs and stuff. So I was hanging out there. And then I went down to Stratford to the RSC and did the same thing, knocked on the door. "Is there anything I can do?" And they found me things to do. So I was totally in love with the theater. I absolutely love the idea of putting on a show. There are those movies like Shakespeare in Love, which is a great movie in a lot of ways, but it's basically about putting on a show. I just love that. But my problem was, as a teenager, I was serious, I was earnest, I thought about things. And there was this very famous British theatre director called Peter Brook, who down in Stratford, I think 1971, he did a fantastic Midsummer Night's Dream, absolutely groundbreaking, a really famous production. And he wrote a book called The Empty Space. And he had this argument that the theatre needs nothing except actors, a script, and an empty space in which to perform. And my problem was I was not an actor and I wasn't writing the script. I was a backstage person. Unfortunately, I had no talent at all for onstage stuff. So I migrated backstage, which I was very happy with until I read this book. And I convinced myself in my earnest teenage way that a backstage person in the theater is fundamentally superfluous. You don't really need that person. It's about the actors in the script. So I was kind of disappointed. I thought, what else can I do? So then I thought television, where backstage people are absolutely necessary. You can't have TV without technicians in the background. So I thought I'll go to TV. So I went to Granada TV in Manchester, back in the old days of ITV, when it was a sort of active collaborative network. And I worked there for nearly 20 years and just absolutely loved it. It was a fabulous company, fabulous job. For instance, my very first week, I was 22 years old, about to turn 23. And the woman that was training me up had been there forever and knew everybody. So I started on a Monday. And along the way, she said, "Oh, by the way, on Friday, we're having lunch with some actors." So I thought, okay, fine. And so Friday rolls around, and it's supposed to be a picnic lunch. But of course, this is Manchester, and so it was obviously pouring with rain. So the picnic was moved inside into the studio where these guys were working. And so I walk in with this person training me, and there's 4 actors there: Laurence Olivier, Ralph Richardson, Alec Guinness, and John Beelgood. And I thought, yeah, this is a lot. And it was a great lunch, actually, because this was toward the end of 1977, and Alec Guinness had just been in Star Wars. And it was well known that George Lucas, when he was making Star Wars, had really no budget. So he couldn't pay Alec Guinness, really. So he paid him with a monster back-end deal, which if the movie succeeded and made a profit, Guinness would make an absolute fortune. And of course, by this point, the movie was already huge. So these 3 other knights of the theater were just seething with jealousy And it was fantastic. Like, anyway, and it just got better from that point on. It was a great, great, great job. Loved it. And in a lot of ways, I wish I was still doing it, except one day my boss said something to me that made it just impossible for me to continue there. He said, "You're fired." Which was a severe problem at the time. And because as well as my job, which was, I was a kind of TV director, as well as my actual job, I was also, the last several years, had been shop steward for the for the technicians union. And the problem was that Rupert Murdoch was in the background trying to get a satellite operation going, and with the cooperation of the Thatcher government was their strategy was to damage terrestrial television in order to create a space for the satellite. And part of the damage was attacking the unions, because that was going to be the thing that that made it easy, or at least feasible, to do. And we had a shop steward, this ancient old guy called Malcolm Foster, and he was about to retire. And the management put the word around, nobody should stand for that vacancy, because if you do, we'll fire you within a week and you will never work in the industry again. And that really was my first Jack Reacher moment, that I thought, well, we'll see about that. So I put my name forward and I was elected unopposed. And sure enough, like the next day, this manager bumped into me in the corridor and said, "You idiot, you'll be gone in a week." And that week turned into 2 years and 3 months, a constant fighting, which I kind of enjoyed in a way. But the problem was I'd burned so many bridges that by the time it came to an end, there was zero chance that I could work in that industry again. I was just blacklisted, essentially. So I thought, what am I going to do? I was 39 years old, nearly 40, and I thought, I'd really like to retire, but it was a little too soon for that. I actually didn't have any money. I spent it all. And so I thought, what am I going to do? And then that loops back to a completely parallel track in my life, which was the reading. I'd read constantly, I mean, literally constantly, every single type of book. And yet I had never, ever really conceived of the idea that somebody was producing this stuff. I had no image in my head of somebody sitting down and writing them or publishing them. I just thought they were there. But a few years before the end, I had begun to sort of think and see how a book was written. There was one particular author, John G. MacDonald, an author from Florida, who from 1964 until about 1984 had written a series with a series character called Travis McGee was the character. And I was reading those and loving them as entertainment, but also for some reason I could sort of see, like a blueprint, I could see what he was doing and why and when and how. And I thought, oh, wow, maybe I could do this. But of course I forgot about it because I was so busy at work. But then when it came to it, I thought, all right, this is the time. You got to put up or shut up. Try it. Try writing a book. And I remember saying to myself, I've read some. How hard can it be? So I wrote the first book, and happily, it wasn't monster to begin with. People misremember the chronology, they compress it. The first book was like really a sort of cult genre success, but sales-wise, it was modest. It was the first book. I remember the first printing of the U.S. hardcover was 18,000 copies. Well, now I get 18,000 copies shoplifted in New York alone. So it was just, the second book did a little better. The third book did a little better, but it was really 8 years before it was prominent or noticeable. So people in their minds compress it as if it was an instant success. And it was an instant. I remember at the very beginning, my agent told me, He said, listen, it takes you 10 years to become an overnight success. And it really did.
And so what was your path to becoming published? Did you find an agent and go the traditional route?
Yeah, I mean, well, to go back to that earlier question, where did Jack Reacher come from? I had learned enough, having been in television for so long, which is a very audience-based thing where you get instant feedback. Television, the feedback is often on the phone. People watching at home, they call up on the phone moaning and complaining. And then there's the reviews the very next morning in the newspaper and so on. So it was very instantaneous. And I had learned over the years that you can't plan a success. Every success in show business is accidental. Every single thing is either better or worse than you thought it was going to be. So I figured there's no point in making a plan. I can't sit here and think, this is what I need to write. I need this and I need that and I need this other thing. You can't do that. If you do that, the work comes out wooden and cardboardy and just uninspired. You got to just shut your eyes and write whatever it is you're feeling, whatever you secretly want. And so without any conscious thought at all, Reacher emerged. And then retrospectively, I didn't want to think about it for many years in case the bubble burst and I was somehow stuck. So I didn't think, I just kept on doing them. But then when I felt secure enough, you can look back and you think, Reacher is he's the modern version of a character that has always existed. The knight errant, the mysterious stranger, the noble loner who shows up and solves a problem and then moves on. And it's been everywhere. Every period of every culture has this character. Americans think they invented it with the Westerns, which, that is an absolute paradigm. There's a great Western author called Zane Grey, who he's worth reading. And every book, there's a homestead isolated, miles from anywhere. And all the men are absent because they're on a cattle drive. And the women and children that are in this little homestead in some terrible danger, some awful peril, and it's all about to go horrible. And then at the very last second, the mysterious rider comes in off the range. And in exchange for a woman-cooked meal, he will unsheath his rifle, he'll take care of the problem, and then he rides off into the sunset, which they think they invented that, but they really didn't. They borrowed that from medieval Europe, where, like a black forest, this vast, uncharted, dangerous place. And it wouldn't be a homestead, it would be a traveling band of pilgrims. They were on their way to Jerusalem, and they were in terrible trouble, and it was all about to go horrible. And then this mysterious knight rides out of the trees, takes care of the problem, and rides off into the sunset. This character has been there forever. And so what I was doing, obviously, I had internalized that story over the years, and I was reproducing a modern version of it. And along with that, I was also very fed up with underdog fiction. For some reason, I don't like the underdog. I like the overdog. And for me, it really started with David and Goliath. I had a Ladybird book from a jumble sale. Remember those Ladybird books?
Yeah.
Fabulous pictures in it.
Yeah.
And it was David and Goliath. And I loved the pictures, I loved the story, but I was so annoyed that David won. Why couldn't Goliath win? And literally, as a sort of 4-year-old, I read that book over and over again, hoping that one day Goliath would win. And so I thought, when it came to it, I thought, I'm going to have Goliath. Goliath is the good guy. This physically unchallengeable person is the good guy. But could I get drama out of that? If he's in no danger, because Reacher's never in any danger, he's obviously going to win. Can that be dramatic? That was the technical challenge. Can you have a massive overdog and still have suspense? that was what I was trying to work out. And yeah, but it worked. It worked fine. And, doing all right so far.
So what qualities is it about Reacher that you think resonates with readers across the different countries and cultures?
I think, like I said, it's this universal desire to have that person around. I mean, everybody in this room has a problem of some kind. Hopefully it's trivial or minor. It could be very serious. But wouldn't it be great if one night there's a tap at the door, and you open the door, and there's this strong, silent figure, and he solves your problem, and then he goes away. We dream about that. Human beings intensely want that. They want somebody to come and fix their problem, or they want to be the person that fixes the problem. And so they read a Reacher book, and it is, because real life is shit. I mean, nothing is ever fixed. There's no closure. If your house gets burgled, you're never going to see the stuff again. They're never going to find the guys. If your car gets nicked, you're never going to see it again. We live with this buzz of frustration all the time. There is never an ending. There is never closure. There's never satisfaction. So that's why we love fiction of this nature. In a crime fiction book, if your house gets burgled, you bet your stuff back. They will find the guy. If it's a Reacher book, he will shoot them in the head. And that is the secret to Reacher. But, I mean, like I said, readers as a whole are the most thoughtful, civilized, educated people. But I guarantee everybody in this room has got a list of 10 people they would cheer if she does. One time I was doing a book launch and playing your role was Bill Clinton. He was doing the onstage interview with me.
Oh, well, I can't compete with that.
So I said that line, everybody's got a list of 10 people. And he said, mine's a lot longer than you.
So we're on book 30 now at Reacher. Over the course of the series, how do you think he's changed, if at all?
Well, that's a great question because all this stuff about the character must change. The character must go on a journey. The character must learn something in the story, along the story. I hated that. That's university level stuff that it doesn't really work in the real world. As a reader, what I wanted was familiarity. I mean, obviously, I wanted a different story or a different plot every time, but I wanted the same character, reliable, like my friend, like spending time with a friend once a year. I didn't want him to change. And so I've spent all my effort making Reacher not change. I wanted to stay the same forever. But it's a delicate balance because, of course, the author changes. The author gets older. You live in a different life now than you used to live. So I'm changing. I try very hard to make sure Reacher doesn't change. But I guess he does to a certain extent. I think the most marked thing, actually, and this came about when I started working with my brother. He pointed out that Reacher used to be a lot more chatty in the earlier books. He would speak entire paragraphs of dialogue. And over the years, for some reason, I don't really know what it is, for some reason I've made Reacher more and more and more reticent and say less and less. So that in some of my life of books, if Reacher would answer in 3 words, that's better than 4 words, And if it was a 2-line piece of dialogue, that was a long piece of dialogue. And if it was 3 lines, that was more or less a filibuster, it was going on forever. Andrew pointed that out, and I think in a lot of ways that's the main way he changed. He just became more and more silent.
Mm-hmm. Was that conscious, Lita?
No, absolutely unconscious. I don't know why it was. Maybe it was because it was a sort of screen influence, I think. Because while I was writing, right from day one, really. The first book came out on March the 17th, 1997. And immediately Hollywood bought an option on it. And so I was involved with sort of movie deals right from day one. And then what happens is they buy an option, and that is they give you money in order to have a year to decide whether they want to own this property and make a movie. And if they haven't decided yet, they'll maybe renew the option for a second year, or if they let it go, then you sell the option to somebody else. And Reacher has always been optioned to the movies, and it is the most magical system. You are literally getting money for nothing. They're paying you money to decide, and it's fantastic. I recommend it highly. I mean, tonight, go home and open up a dictionary. F for free money, that is a movie option. And it also avoids the danger of it actually being made, because if it does get made and people don't like it, you get endless trouble out of that. But it was renewed every year, and then 2005, there was it lapsed again, and Paramount Pictures bought it. And there was an underbidder in the auction a very prominent producer, who was very upset that he hadn't got it. And his ego meant that he wanted some small part of me somehow. And he hired me on a sort of frequent ad hoc basis as what they call story doctor. He had the belief that novelists are better at plotting than screenwriters. He hated what he called the refrigerator moment, by which he meant you go to the movie, you come home, you open the refrigerator to grab a beer, and you think, wait a minute, why didn't he just go to the police at the very beginning? There's always a flaw. And he thought novelists were better at it. So he hired me to fix the script. And then he hired me again to fix another one. And then I got a call from Canada, because most stuff is shot in Canada now. And they were trying the final scene for this movie. It was a Michael on Dark Shade book with a very prominent screenwriter. The final scene was just not working. And he said, can you read this, if I email you the screenplay, will you read it and fix the end scene by 6 a.m.? And I like working at night, so, and I especially like working for that guy's money. So I did it. I fixed it overnight, sent it in, and he kept on hiring me. And so I was writing a lot of scripts and dialoguing scripts. Everything in a script we got to keep super tight, because you've seen what movie scripts look like. That traditional format, which is a lot of white space and that courier typeface and the little narrow dialogue block in the middle. It's done like that because decades ago, Warner Brothers worked out that if you do it in that format, one page averages 1 minute, so that you can kind of see how long the movie's going to be based on the number of pages in the script. And so to keep it to a limit, you've got to be super tight. If 3 words will do, you'll use 3 rather than 4, because that little dialogue block is so small that if you go over the next line, the whole thing pushes down, and suddenly you've got 110 pages instead of 105. And so you learn to be incredibly economical doing it that way. I think that was possibly it. But that producer that he kept on hiring me for these secret jobs, and I really enjoyed it. And then one day they dried up completely, because that guy, unfortunately, was Harvey Weinstein. So that was my brush with him. And he was actually a horrible guy. But I sort of, because he made this offer, and my film agent, he kind of wanted me to do it because it was a feather in an agent's cap. He kind of didn't want me to do it because Weinstein was such an unpleasant character. But to me, from Hansleth, I thought, I mean, that's a red rag to a bull. If they say this is an unpleasant guy, then I will take him on. And so I said, sure, I'll take that movie. And so I went to see Harvey, and he spent the first 20 minutes telling me, oh, he's a real sweetie and he treats the talent with great respect. but sort of between the lines, it was, you better believe I'm a tough guy. And it went on and on like this. And he told me the story. He only has one eye because he lost an eye in a fight when he was 12 years old in Brooklyn. And he was carrying on about what a tough guy he was. And at one point, I just got fed up with it. I said, Harvey, F you. You've got no idea what a tough guy is. I come from Birmingham. I've got two eyes because when I was 12, I won all my fights. And, from that point, he treated me very well once he challenged him.
Yeah.
But to my shame, I really had never considered what he was like with women. I could see that he was very competitive with men and you had to stand your ground. But I hadn't really thought about the women aspect. And afterward, I wasn't at all surprised.
So obviously you worked on this with the screen, but in case anyone didn't know, but I imagine you all do, Reacher was made into 2 film adaptations with Tom Cruise in 2012 and 2016, and more recently a TV series for Amazon Prime. How did it feel to see your character brought to life on the screen?
Well, it felt great, to be honest. I mean, it's a mark of success in a way that, although it's not really a thing that I accept, that there's a lot of people who believe that a book is a kind of halfway thing, and it is just yearning to become a movie. And I don't believe that at all. The book is the final product. If somebody wants to make, it's not a pupa or a chrysalis. It's not waiting to be something else. It is a book, and that's all it needs to be. And it's the definitive version, and nothing will ever change that. And if somebody makes a movie out of it, that is a side project. It's parallel. It's not sequential. So but it is, it's a marvelous success, and it's fantastic promotion. And that was the problem with the Tom Cruise thing, because I mentioned the 2005 Paramount deal. Well, when you see a movie, you've seen there are numerous producers listed at the beginning and a lot of different companies often, because there's usually a lot of investors in the movie. So it was made in Paramount, but Cruise Wagner, which was his production company, they were investing in it because they thought it would be profitable. And that was 2005, and then nothing happened for 6 years because it goes into what they call development hell. Nothing happening, except they were paying me every year for 6 years, which is fine with me. And then they eventually got a screenplay written by a guy called Christopher McQuarrie, who was an excellent screenwriter who had just won an Oscar for The Usual Suspects. And it was a brilliant screenplay. It was fantastic, and it got circulated amongst all the interested parties. I got a copy. All the producers and executive producers got a copy. Therefore, Cruise got a copy, and he read it, and he thought he was so impressed with it. He thought, I want to play this guy. And then I got a phone call from the main producer and McQuarrie himself, who was writing it and going to direct it. And they said, we're coming to New York to talk to you. We've got something to discuss. And they mentioned the restaurant where I was supposed to meet them. And it was one of those New York restaurants that is impossible to get into and costs like $1,000 a meal. And so I thought, oh my God, they're going to tell me it's Tom Cruise. Because if it was something less controversial, it would have been a cheaper restaurant. So sure enough, they get there and gives a little bit of small talk, and I say, come on, guys, just tell me it's Cruise, right? And they said, yes, it is. And I figured, I've got a second here. If I throw myself to the floor screaming, they will pencil it. But shamefully, I spent that second thinking, okay, what is the basic proposition here? And it is the world's last remaining global movie star wants to spend $200 million promoting my books around the world. How do I feel about that? You know what? I feel pretty damn good about it. So I said yes to the Cruise thing, but I put in a clause saying after 2 movies, I have a veto over whether there will be any more. Because frankly, I figured after 2 movies, I'll have gotten all the promotion I need, and therefore, why continue? But Tom himself, lovely guy. Nothing you ever hear about Tom Cruise is true. He is a lovely guy, a real gentleman, a good friend. He works incredibly hard. He is a very skilled theoretician about the art of storytelling. It was a great experience. Nothing negative about it at all, except stature. Yeah, that was the problem, and it was a nightmare. The readership hated it. They hated the whole idea, and I thought, I'm sorry I let him down, but I didn't really feel I'd let him down because maybe naively I felt the readers would share my view, which is the book is the thing. Nothing will ever change the book. The movie can come out, you pull the book down off his shelf, all the words are still there. Nothing has changed. But I misinterpreted really how offended the readers would get. So that after the two movies, then by coincidence, during all that time, streaming television, binging television had been invented. Broadband was all over the world by then. People were doing streaming. And so there is not an author alive who would actively choose a feature film over a season of streaming television. It's a much better medium for a novel, mostly because of the running time. A movie, but by the time you look at the actual content, you've got 90 minutes probably to tell the story. On streaming television, you've got as long as you want. 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, as long as you want. You can do the whole thing, the quiet parts, the fun parts. It doesn't have to be just relentless action. So streaming television was great. Plus, it has another advantage, which is the financial structure is different. When you do a feature film, it is the identity of the actor that attracts the money and all the investment. So, and there aren't that many actors that can attract a lot of money to make a big movie. Whereas with streaming television, the platform, in my case, Amazon, just gives you the money, and then you can have whoever you want. So I well remember that decision. I mean, I just thought, great, we are going to find the biggest galaxy, which is basically what we did. Alan Ritchson is, I think, a great reacher, and equally really nice guy as well, but he really is a reacher, much more so on the screen. So, yeah, we got there in the end, and I'm really sort of grateful for the way that people have forgiven me for the Tom Cruise excursion, but we're where we should be now with Alan, I think.
So now I'm going to pass over to you guys if you've got any questions. I've got two lovely assistants that have got some roving mics. So does anybody have any questions? Who's gonna get there first with a microphone?
So yeah, it's just a quick question. I know you're a lifelong Aston Villa fan, and I'm just wondering how excited you are about the Europa Cup, and also whether you might consider putting a name in.
Well, yeah, I'm a Villa fan, and that there's a like all clubs, the supporters have songs and Villa till I die, and that's, I don't know how I got in that position, but that's how I feel. Yeah, I started out going to West Bromwich. Actually, there was a kid up the road whose dad had season tickets for him and the boy. And he worked in a little metalworking shop in West Bromwich, and we would go up there and get on a Saturday lunchtime. And if it was a reserve game, the dad would give me his season ticket. If it was a first team game and his dad had to work overtime on the Saturday afternoon, I would get the ticket. And so I started out at West Bromwich, saw 2 or 3 games there. And then the fourth time, it was a reserve game at the Albion, and the Villa reserves were there in the old Central League. Remember that? And for some reason, Derek Dugan was playing for the Villa reserves. Later on, much later, I found out he'd been in a terrible car accident not long before, so this was rehabbing after injury, just giving a run out in the reserves. So the Villa come out with Dugan in it, and they look like such a bunch of swaggering pirates. I thought, they're fantastic. And I was 7 years old, and Dugan scored with a header that I would have sworn was about 90 yards. It was probably from the edge of the area or something, but I just thought, yeah, forget the Alpine, the Biller in my team now. So the next Saturday, I walked by myself down to Villa Park. I lived exactly halfway between the Hawthorns and Villa Park. And my family was super respectable, but back in those days, on a Saturday, you had your breakfast, you went out, and they didn't see you again all day long, and that was normal. And they didn't know what you were doing and didn't care. So I walked to Villa Park as a 7-year-old, and I had sixpence in my pocket, and I had no idea how much it cost to get in. I thought maybe sixpence will be enough. But of course, you don't pay when you're 7 years old. There's always a bunch of old geezers who smuggle you in under the turnstile and make sure you're okay. And so it was Easter Saturday in 1962, and Villa were playing Leicester, and they won 8-3. And I thought, wow, this is great. And so the next 2 days later, on Easter Monday, they were also at home playing Nottingham Forest. So I walked down to that. Again, I had my sixpence, the same one. And again, I was smuggled in under the turnstile. And the Villa beat Forest 5-1. I thought, in 48 hours, I've seen 13 Villa goals. This is football, man. This is the way to go. But that is like the guys who sell crack cocaine outside the schoolyard. You know, the first two are freebies, and then the misery sets in. And it was a hell of a thing supporting the Villa at that time, because we were in the 3rd division when I was in high school. It was a nightmare, but you got to, you stick with your team, and it has been completely up and down. Obviously, some tremendous highs. And this year, I mean, Emma is great, and yeah, it's great to be in the final. And I'm not sure whether I'll go yet or not. We'll see. Nobody's offered me a ticket yet. Because, I mean, and this is the biggest irony of life, that I could actually afford a ticket now. But I still don't pay, because since they know I'm back in Britain, the chairman invites me to the chairman's suite all the time, which you don't pay. You just go and they give you dinner, and it's great. You park right there in the north stand, and I love it. So, but he hasn't called yet, so we'll see.
Any other questions?
How much do you plot before writing your first draft?
I never ever plot or plan ahead of time. There are two, they call them plotters or pantsters, writing by the seat of your pants. And I never plan, because what I want, the way I know it's working is, think back to when you were a reader. There are certain times in your life where you've got a great book on the go. And if you have to put it down for some reason, like it's dinner time or whatever, you get that particular feeling of annoyance. It's a unique feeling in the whole world. You've got to put your book down, and you just hate that, even if it's an attractive thing you're going to be doing. I remember one Christmas Day in the States, my daughter was in her first job. She was working in a cinema. She got a job she started as a concession salesperson, and then within a very short period of time, she was assistant manager. And in the US, because it's a kind of multi-faith environment, Christmas Day is not necessarily a holiday. Cinemas are open, restaurants are open. So she was working daytime on Christmas Day, and she was going to join us at about 6 p.m. for our family of Christmas. And I remember I was reading a book, a Val McDermid book called A Place of Execution, and I was just loving it. And I kept thinking, I'm going to have to put it down in a minute. And I kept thinking, I hope she's late. I hope there's a snowstorm. I hope she skids off the road and doesn't get here for several hours. I love that feeling of, so into a book. And I want to feel exactly the same when I'm writing one. I want to sit down and think, I can't wait to find out what happens next. And if I plotted it out, I would know that. Because what I live for is the story. I want the story. And if I had told myself the story in the form of an outline or a plan, then I'd be bored with it. And I think that would show through in the sitting there typing it out. I think it would show through. By that point, I'm ready for the next story. So the only way I can do it is to invent the story in the moment, line by line. So there is never a plan, and I will find what feels like a good first sentence and write it down, and then it's what is a good second sentence. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen? I remember one book, there was a guy who actually sat and watched me write a book. He wanted to do an academic project where he would witness the creation of a book over the 6 months it took to write. And I remember writing the first line, moving a guy as big as Kiva wasn't easy. And I had no clue who Kiva was, or why he was dead, or whatever. I had no clue. But it sounded good, so I just kept on going, and eventually the story works out in my head, and it's there on the page. But the point is, I'm excited about it. I'm excited about doing it. Therefore, I think it stands a fair chance that the reader is going to be excited about reading it. So yeah, I have no plan ever, and people find that people don't believe it sometimes, but it's absolutely true. I never have an idea what it's going to be about, or who the people are, or who did it, or even what the crime is a lot of the time. And there have been several times where I've, been writing this woman, and I'm thinking, yeah, she's beautiful, and obviously she and Reacher are going to get it on. And then I think, no, wait a minute, she's the bad person, and she becomes something else.
Wow.
How does it work co-authoring a book? How do you go about actually two people writing a book together?
Well, not well. Frankly, the idea. I mean, I'll give you the background to it, which was as a reader, as I said, everything is based on how I felt as a reader, and as a reader, especially as a younger person, as a kid and a sort of young adult, I would get into an author or a series. And way too many times, suddenly the author would get bored. You'd be 4 books in, you'd be 6 books in, you're just absolutely loving it. You go to the library, you get the next one, and it's awful because the author has run out of gas, he's bored, he's phoning it in. And that happens way too many times. So when I started writing myself, I made myself an absolute promise I would not do that. If I felt I was running out of gas, or if there was any danger I was going to be phoning it in, I would stop. And I had a theory about how to do it. I thought Reacher is a noble old warhorse and he needs a definitive end. And I even had a title ready. The title was going to be Die Lonely. And Reacher, difficult to figure it out plot-wise because, Reacher's a very capable guy. But it would have been the final scene, a choice. Either Reacher gives up the person he's helping or he gives up himself. And of course, Reacher give up himself. And so the final scene, Reacher bleeding to death on a filthy motel bathroom floor somewhere. That was going to be Die Lonely. And over the years, I thought, I can't do that. People love the guy too much. It would be gratuitously cruel to do that. So then I thought, I'll do a metaphoric version of that where, whatever the adventure is, it's done. And we have the traditional final scene. Reacher empties his pockets of all the crap he's accumulated and he walks to the bus depot ready to get out of town. But he stops. He stops halfway there. And he thinks, you know what? This is a pretty nice place. Maybe I'll adopt a dog and rent a flat. And that would be the metaphoric version of Die Lonely. And then I thought, no, that's not going to work either. And I was really in despair about it. And I started daydreaming. I thought, I'll go down to the crossroads at midnight and I'll sell my soul in exchange for a magic potion that will give me all the energy and the stamina and the ideas that I had 15 years ago. And then there were moments with potions, that's a fantasy. But then I sort of slapped myself in the head and said, you idiot. you know somebody who was you 15 years ago, which is my baby brother. Initially, there were three of us. I was the middle of three. And then grotesquely late, there was the menopausal mistake, which is Andrew. I mean, they told him that.
Oh, lovely.
And so, and he became a thriller writer on his own. By this point, he'd done 9 books of his own under his own name. And I thought, I'll ask him to see if he wants to take it over. And I expected him to say no, because he's a very stubborn and obstinate boy. But he said, yeah. So then we went into what was billed really as a 4-book collaboration. But it was not very collaborative. He did all the work. We would talk a lot, but we always had, he reads the same kind of books. We've always talked about books and life and this and that in general. And we are very similar. I mean, for instance, a while ago, some years ago, do you remember there was stories coming out of Russia about these prosperous, well-dressed businessmen falling to their deaths from high floor windows in office buildings or hotels? And clearly some kind of assassination thing going on with Putin and everything. But I thought that is just a great image and it's a great story. We've got to use that. So I saw Andrew a couple of days later, and I was literally taking a breath to tell him about this. And he said to me, have you seen those stories out of Russia about those guys? So we're very much on the same wavelength. And he, and now he's doing it all by himself. And they're absolutely not as good as mine, but they are 99%.
I reckon we've got a couple more questions at the back.
If I can greedily ask too, who are the authors you're really enjoying right now? And then is there one book that you return to again and again and re-review?
At the moment, I'm totally into Alice Roberts, the archaeologist and paleoanthropologist, I guess she really is. So today I'm reading her book called Buried. The book I returned, I'm a reluctant rereader. I'm obsessed with, there's so much out there, so much new talent, so many great books I haven't read. I'm a little reluctant to spend time reading what I've already read. But of the two that I would return to more than others, I think, one is an Alistair MacLean book. The English title is The Last Frontier. It's about Hungary at the end of the 1950s, a year or two after the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. And it's an excellent thriller, like Alistair MacLean's good work. I mean, MacLean is one of those guys that fell off a cliff after 6 or 8 books, but The Last Frontier is one of his really good ones. And it is unbelievably sensitive about the Soviet Union. They're not just a sort of monolithic bad guy thing. He's very intelligent about how he portrays their motivations and so on. So that's the book I love. The other book, I think, if you'd pressed me on it, the best novel ever written, I think, in the 20th century would be Sophie's Choice by William Styron. And my sort of jokey tagline for that is, I say to people, if you're only going to read 5 novels in your life, make it that one. Because it really is 5 books in one. It's a Southern novel, it's a New York novel, it's a European novel, it's a World War II novel, and so on. I think that is an amazing book. And again, in terms of, I met his widow. I did a bizarre festival in Palm Springs in California, which I didn't really want to do. I told my assistant to turn down any requests coming in over a certain period. And so this festival said, would I come? And my assistant said, no, he's not free. And then they said, well, suppose we gave him a big fee, would he come? And she said, no, I don't think he is free. And one of the sponsors for this festival is a local luxury car dealer. And so they called again and said, suppose we gave him a Rolls Royce to use for the weekend. Would he come? And she said, I'll ask him. So I go down there, and Palm Springs is just full of grotesquely rich people. And there was, just money everywhere. And a lot of people retire there. And I met William Styron's widow. And she told me, I said how much I liked Sophie's Choice and admired it. And she said he was working on something else. And he was a very bad-tempered man. He suffered from depression a lot. He was working on something else. And one morning he came down and threw it in the bin and said to her, I just had the most amazing dream. I know what I'm going to write next. So that really gritty, involved book was based on a dream.
One more question, I think. Gentleman in the front.
Hi. It's actually, what's your position on the state of the written word now? Do you feel it's in decline and struggling, or whether there's still hope?
I think that's a really great question, and especially now, because literacy is declining. People are not reading as much as they used to. People are reading at lower levels of achievement than they used to. And in a way, I regret that. In a way, I don't really mind that, because, as I said before, it's about story. And there is no doubt that humans have an absolutely permanent and insatiable appetite for story. There's a very convincing theory that we're called Homo sapiens, but really we should be called pan-narrans, which is the storytelling ape, because storytelling is so central to our culture and our definition of being human, that story will always exist. I think it is a very happy coincidence that reading has been the way we consume story over the last couple of 100 years, because reading is unique in entertainment, in as much as every other form of entertainment, you are passive. You're sitting there and it is coming at you. It has been provided for you by somebody else. Whereas reading is a strange thing. You've got these strange black marks on white paper, and you do that, the author does that. And then the author could be dead for 100 years, and somebody picks up the book and they scan their eye over those strange black marks. And it is their intellect, it is the reader's energy, the reader's brain that is at that point creating the story. The story is appearing in the reader's head, just like it used to appear in the author's head 100 years ago. But it's the reader's energy, it's the reader's achievement that is creating that story at that point. So reading is a uniquely active form of entertainment. The entertainment does not happen unless the reader interrogates the text and creates the story. So I think reading is a very happy thing. It is a very positive thing because it's active. It makes the reader's brain work. You are not just sitting there receiving something. You are, in fact, creating it for yourself. But that said, one of my other interests is, explains Alice Roberts probably, is that I'm fascinated by human origins and our long evolution. And we suddenly, at some point, it was probably about 500,000 years ago, judging by the fossil record, we suddenly got very large brains, which was probably driven by language, the necessity for complex, sophisticated, syntactical language, which saved our ass as a species. We were pathetic as a species. We were more often prey than anything else. We were weak, slow, slender, not very good animals. But as soon as we had syntactical language, which allows us to plan and speculate, it lets us have a plan B and a plan C if necessary, with a prearranged trigger that will swap from one plan to the other. Suddenly, Instead of being one of the weakest AUs on the savannah, we suddenly became a group of 100 humans coordinated by sophisticated language, suddenly became the most powerful creature on earth. So language saved us. And then but that language was all nonfiction. We were telling the truth to each other. There's no point in planning something if you're not telling the truth. If you say, oh, the woolly mammoths are over in that valley, it's true. There's no point in saying it if it's not real. And to a large extent, language still continues like that. You know, my wife says to me, it's going to rain today, take your umbrella. No, that's a true statement. That's nonfiction. But at some point, for some weird reason, we suddenly started making up stories about things that had not happened to people that did not exist. And there's no real explanation for that. Why would we do that? It wasn't predetermined. It wasn't predestined. We just suddenly did. And we don't know when we did it, but it was, you know, we know, for instance, that music is around 80,000 years old, probably from the old musical instruments we found. We can assume that singing was older than that, even because singing doesn't require any instruments. We know that art is, you know, probably around the same age, 50, 70,000 years old. Storytelling must have been way older than that, because we already had language, we already had expressive voices. We had the motivation to make up these stories. Stories could be 300,000 years old, the idea of fiction. But for almost all of those 300,000 years, we've been doing it orally. So sitting around listening to somebody tell you a story. The New York Times bestseller of those days was the guy that had 40 people sitting there paying rapt attention. The failed author was the guy sitting there with 3 people fidgeting and not paying attention. So story is fundamentally oral. And so I would regret it if people stopped reading, because, as I said, I think reading is active, it is intellectually active, whereas listening to a story is fundamentally passive. But I would not be at all surprised if this idea of reading off a page is a very temporary blip that's going to last 200 or 300 years and then be replaced again by oral storytelling. Because from the inside of publishing, you see that, yeah, print books are at best static, you know, at worst declining somewhat in terms of sales, whereas audiobooks are going through the roof. And so I think there's got to be a reason for that. I mean, there's procedural reasons for audiobooks doing so well, because back in the day, audiobooks always felt a bit clunky. They were incredibly inconvenient. You had 25 cassettes, then you had 10 CDs, and it was not a natural thing to do. Whereas now we have like 2 entire generations that have been born wearing earbuds, and they live to download things. It's easy now, it's natural now. So I would not be surprised if we revert to listening to story rather than reading story. But I do think it will be a step backward because of that intellectual engagement. I mean, literally, when you read a book, you are creating the story, not me. You are by that point. And there is something unique about that.
I think that's the perfect ending and the way to celebrate the National Year of Reading. So can I just say, we are so honoured to have you here, and we would like to say a big thank you. So
Thank you all very much for coming. And as I say, thank you for being readers. You are people of charm and quality, and you are the most sensitive, educated, and thoughtful amongst the population. And please keep on supporting the libraries, because we do not know what libraries are going to be 10 years from now or 20 years from now. We don't know because of the digital world. But we do know libraries will be doing something. And the quality of staff, the quality of library directors is sky high. So we need to trust them and let them figure it out, and then we'll enjoy it later.
So on that note, don't forget to join your local library, especially if you're from Warwickshire.
And thank you as well to all the staff tonight as well, who have been working very hard to get this event going. So thank you to